Hello everybody, this is Kaz. Today I'm going to discuss why Japanese words are long based on Eigo Noda perspective, based on the book that my wife and I wrote. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so it's related to the syllable structure of Japanese compared to English. English syllable consists of, generally speaking, consonant, vowel, consonant. When, take, put. This is just a generic basic pattern. Japanese, one syllable can accommodate up to two sounds, consonant and vowel. So like a mosquito is like a ka. Tatami, ta, it's one syllable and consisting of T and A. So it's basically up to two sounds. And Gina in this book, we call, she calls English a three-beat language because a syllable can accommodate, contain up to three sounds. And it can have more, but basically three. And she calls Japanese a two-beat language because of this. Containing two sounds in each syllable. So let's take a look at this word, Michael Jackson. In English, that would be Mike, Cole, Jackson, Michael Jackson. Okay, so it's all CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant. Japanese, Maikeru Jackson. So it goes on and on. I want to give you a hypothetical kind of mental exercise. Imagine that there are only one vowel in this language, let's say A, and we have only two consonants, let's say B and G. Okay, if we impose this restriction on Japanese, it will be like this. The only possible words in this language would be ba and ga, that's all, right? In English, I can go bab, bag, gag, gav. I can create four possibilities. So what does this mean? This means that in English, you just need one syllable, and then you can create a large number of words. And Japanese, because syllable can contain two sounds, the number of words that I can create is limited if it's a short one-syllable word. Okay? So what do we have to do in Japanese? That means that we have to create, combine these syllables to create a new word to compensate this limitation. Like, what's the next slide? So, for example, as a result in English, let's say, who is he? It's just three syllables, right? In Japanese, it's going to be very long. Kare wa dare desu ka? It's very long. Kare wa dare desu ka? 8 syllables. So, as a result of this restriction related to the structure of the language, Japanese words and expressions are long, a lot longer than English. So, some more observations. Oh, but even in Japanese, we do have a situation where we have a CVC cluster as a N-ending word, like ban, my turn, ban. We can do CVC there. Kan is like intuition, or can, kan. So it's one syllable. So N is the only word that can complete a syllable with three sounds in it, which allows this play of shiritori, like people do. Let's say I say wasabi, and then you have to say a word that begins with B, toku, or something like that. And whoever says the word that contains N at the end loses. Like bijin, a beautiful person, bijin, then you are done, because there is no word in Japanese that begins from N. Okay, so. But think of Korean. It has a lot more flexibility. Like Kim Jong-il, a syllable can end with M. Also N, as in Japanese is the same. But you can also end with L. So Korean language is a lot more flexible. And also I want to point out that in Japan we have a lot of dialects, and I think Western Japanese dialects, like mine, are very flexible, like Korean. For example, kimuchi. I think people in Tokyo or people who speak standard Japanese say kimuchi as mu has to be a syllable of its own. But in Hiroshima we say kimchi. Kimchi tapta. So I think in Hiroshima we have M ending. And my hypothesis and observation is that the more, the more west you go, then our language becomes similar to Korean or Chinese, and a little bit like English. Okay, so we have to ask, why is Japanese a two-beat language? Why is it like this? I think we can create hypotheses. My hypothesis, historically constructed to allow writing. When Japan had to modernize quickly, I think people noticed that if we continue to use dialects, we can't even write. For example, if I say, "Antanan Shoron, what are you doing in Hiroshima, Ben?" I can say it, but I don't know how to write it necessarily. I can force myself to write it. So, only way to be able to write Japanese is to force Japanese into this rigid syllable system where you can have hiragana, and then it sounds like da 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 da, and you can write it like wa sa bi, and you can write wa sa bi. So that's my hypothesis, because Japan, we had a lot of dialects, and somebody had to unify the language and create this writing system. So I guess what I'm saying is that this two-beat nature of the Japanese is somewhat artificial and maybe historically created as Japan was trying to modernize as a centralized country around the capital city of Tokyo. Hypothesis 2. In Japan, we sleep on futon, and futon is kind of firm, and you kind of spread it on the floor. And as a result, because the floor is kind of stiff, you can't really sleep on the side, like the side of the body, which would allow you to breathe deeply at night while sleeping. So instead, you end up sleeping on the back. If you sleep on the back to the floor, the floor is essentially pushing you all night, and the ribs don't move as much. So you end up breathing shallowly. And when you don't breathe deeply, you end up speaking, I think, two-beat. And because your speech and resonation is a little, your speech becomes a little choppy, and you end up speaking, your syllable becomes rigid too. I think what I'm saying is that Japanese people don't breathe deeply compared to Westerners. Sometimes imagine that my wife is in the kitchen, and I go into the kitchen and she's like, "Whoa, I didn't notice you're here." On the other hand, I feel like I can tell if my wife is around because I can hear her breathe, I believe. Even my dog, I can tell. But when it comes to a Japanese person, we are kind of quiet and we don't breathe that deeply. Anyway, next one, consequence. So, because Japanese words are long, I think Japanese is prone to diversification of expressions because, I'm being redundant here, words are long. For example, in English, thank you, I think it's difficult to change that expression to something else by mistake or randomly. On the other hand, arigatougozaimasu is so long. Some people say arigato for short. I think in Hiroshima I often hear angato or arigato-san, arigato ne. And the most extreme example is azasu. So because it's long, you can kind of break the expression into different pieces. And that's, I think, why we have so much diversification in Japanese. And we have so many dialects. And, different ways of saying things depending on where you live.